Well, hello, everyone, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Michael Kugelman. I am the director of the Wilson Center South Asia Institute. For 4 years now, the Wilson Center, in partnership with South Asia Democracy Watch, has been hosting an annual lecture series in honor of the late Asma Jahangir, a leading human rights activist from Pakistan who passed away in 2018. The lecture series features an annual address by a distinguished scholar, opinion leader, or activist who addresses issues of democracy and human rights in South Asia. Our past lecturers have been Dr. Aisha Jalal, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, and Dr. Anita Weiss. We are delighted to be hosting today this year's lecturer, Dr. Sandeep Pandey, a scholar and activist from India. He will be discussing prospects for peace and nuclear disarmament in South Asia. And we will hear more about and from Dr. Pandey in just a few moments, but let me just set the stage a bit. South Asia today is a volatile place. It features two nuclear-armed rivals that also happen to be neighbors, India and Pakistan. There have also been long-standing tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan. India has at times experienced tensions with some of its other smaller neighbors as well. There are contested borders between India and Pakistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and India and China, among others. South Asia is also a growing battlefield for strategic competition between India and China, and increasingly the US and China. South Asia has suffered through multiple wars, and it suffers from a lack of regional connectivity and integration, which hampers trade and other forms of cooperation. So this is why the topic of today's lecture is so salient, but also very ambitious. Many would argue that peace between India and Pakistan may be a near impossibility anytime soon, given the deep levels of mistrust on official levels. Many would argue that nuclear disarmament is but a dream at a moment when both countries, both governments, would believe that having nuclear weapons is an utterly critical national interest. But Dr. Pandey has thought and written deeply on these issues, and he believes very deeply in the need to think about these possibilities, even if they may seem remote at this point. And like the late, great Asma Jahangir, he does not let pessimists or naysayers get in the way of his advocacy and work. So he will share some thoughts on prospects for peace and nuclear disarmament in South Asia, and he'll discuss what major changes would be needed to produce a more peaceful and stable region. I would now like to introduce my friend Kaiser Abbas, Executive Director of South Asia Democracy Watch, our partner in this lecture series. He will offer some brief thoughts and introduce Dr. Pandey. Kaiser is a scholar, journalist, and development consultant. He's been associated with Southern Methodist University, among other institutions. His publications include the book From Terrorism to Television, Dynamics of Media, State, and Society in Pakistan. And I should say that South Asia Democracy Watch, where he is executive director, is a nonprofit group that promotes social justice, human rights, and equality in South Asia through educational programs, conferences, and symposia. After Kaiser introduces Dr. Pandey, we will hear Dr. Pandey's lecture, and then myself, Kaiser, and another member of South Asia Democracy Watch, Aftab Siddiqui, will be on hand to ask a few questions to Dr. Pandey before we open up to questions from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question at any time during the event, there is a Q&A feature on this webcast that you should see at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your questions and then submit it to us. With that, I will conclude and turn things over to you, Kaiser.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. Welcome, everybody, to the fourth Asma Jahangir Memorial Lecture Series. We have been organizing it with a wonderful partnership with the Wilson Center for the last 3 years. And this is our fourth series, a fourth in the series. As you know, and as Michael said, since independence, since the partition of the subcontinent, Pakistan and India have been in a continuous state of conflict. And since they became nuclear power, it has become more dangerous in the area and also for the world. with that introduction, I think we have a person here who can speak about the peace and disarmament, nuclear disarmament in South Asia, not only because he lives there, but he participates in the activities and movements against uh, conflict between India and Pakistan. Let me tell you about his background. I know Dr. Sandeep Pandey since 2011 when we organized a South Asia Peace Conference at a university here in Texas. And he came all the way from India and spoke very eloquently on the same topic. Uh, Dr. Pandey did his PhD in engineering from UC Berkeley, and he went back to India to serve his people and also teach because serving uh, people is really his passion. He not only talks about the issues, but he lives with the people. He lives a very simple life, but he talks, he's an eloquent speaker on the issues in South Asia. With back, uh, Mike, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kaiser. And in fact, I think now we're ready to turn things over to our lecturer. So, Dr. Pandey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and the Wilson Center, and thank you, Kaisar Abbas Sahab, Aftab Siddiqui Sahab of the South Asia Democracy Watch for giving me an opportunity to speak on a topic which is very close to my heart. In fact, in 2005, I had organized a peace march from Delhi to Multan with the objective of promoting peace and friendship between India and Pakistan. So I will talk about that march a little bit towards the end of my presentation. But let me first share the presentation. All right. So can everybody see it?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So as has already been described, India and Pakistan are two nuclear powers, and that makes things very dangerous because among all the nuclear weapon possessing states, the 5 Security Council members and the other 4 or 5, including India, Pakistan, others who have made nuclear weapons or are thought to possess one, even though they may not have publicly tested. Israel, North Korea, and probably Iran. So among all these countries, India and Pakistan are the only ones which are neighbors, and you can imagine the dangerous situation. If we talk about the objective of nuclear disarmament, it has always been there since the end of Second World War, which was also the first time when nuclear weapons were actually used in a war. And fortunately, that has been the only time they have been used. They were not used in any wars after that, even though there are countries which could have used them, but they chose not to use them. So in 45, when United Nations was founded, the first sentence of the preamble says that we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. and then it goes on to say other things. But this highlights the importance of the World Forum of United Nations. That and this is a time immediately after the World War, so it is quite obvious that it was a priority for the formation of United Nations, and number one priority at that time. It talks about other things, human rights and other things, but after it talks about saving the humankind from scourge of war. Then Michael Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan issued a statement that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. This is the time when Cold War had ended, and there were US and the Soviet Union were talking, and they actually engaged in negotiations to reduce their stockpiles of nuclear weapons. So that is an example of how, if the countries want, they can actually reduce their stockpiles, if not completely eliminate them. And very recently, the leaders at the G20 meeting in Bali have issued a joint declaration which says that of course, this is in the context of the Ukraine-Russia war, that the threat of using nuclear weapons is inadmissible. So it is quite clear that, all along during the history, the leaders of the world know that a nuclear weapon is something which should not be used. And it is unfortunate that since 45 now there are about 10 countries which possess it and make this world a very dangerous place to live in. They possess enough weapons to destroy this earth several times over. But there have been saner countries. These 10 I would call them the rogue countries. Which possess weapons. You always have people in society who like to keep arms, and there are some, especially in our part of the world, South Asia, who not only choose to possess arms but would also like to proudly display it. So I would put the 10 nuclear weapons countries in that category. Rogues, people who like to possess and demonstrate weapons and also issue threats from time to time, like the Russia is doing against Ukraine right now. But fortunately, most countries in the world, and if you look at these countries, they total more than 125. So which means more than half the world consists of saner countries which have voluntarily entered into treaties to commit themselves to not make nuclear weapons, to not possess nuclear weapons, and not to allow any other country possessing nuclear weapons to place their weapons on their soil. So Treaty of Tlatelolco, I don't know how to pronounce that, but this is a treaty of countries in Latin America and Caribbean. So all of Latin America and Caribbean is committed to not possess nuclear weapons. Treaty of Rarotonga in the countries in South Pacific have committed themselves through this treaty. All the countries of Southeast Asia through the Treaty of Bangkok, and all the countries of Africa. I mean, just keep in mind the size of Africa. All the countries of Africa through the Treaty of Pelindaba have committed themselves to not possess nuclear weapons. And then there are treaties of the Central Asian, 5 Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and others who have committed themselves to not possess nuclear weapons. And then there is a solitary country, Mongolia, which has passed a resolution in its parliament to not possess a nuclear weapon. So this is amazing. I mean, I find it amazing that countries like India and Pakistan are pursuing a nuclear dream to become, nuclear powers, whereas, more than 125 countries say that they would not like to possess this weapon and have voluntary. This is, I mean, please keep this in mind that this is not the kind of treaty which countries are forced to sign. For example, the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. A lot of countries, we will just discuss about that. A lot of countries thought that it was, a discriminatory treaty because it allowed the five Security Council members to keep their nuclear weapons, whereas it wanted other countries not to possess them. So this is not like one of those treaties which countries are forced to sign. These are treaties where countries have voluntarily, entered into agreement to not keep weapons. So this gives us hope that majority of the world is sane and knows that it is dangerous to possess nuclear weapons, and there's really no point when. And my simple argument is that if we have not used this weapon since 1945 in any war, even in wars where countries have not won or have lost, for example, the United States Vietnam War, the United Kingdom Argentina War, France could have used it in Africa. United States could have used it in Afghanistan or Iraq, but these countries have not chosen to use this weapon because uh, they know the magnitude of disaster that it will cause if it is used. Uh, so my simple argument is that if this weapon is not going to be used in any war, why keep it? And these are countries which understand that logic very well. Now, the treaties at the global level, so the treaties that we just discussed were at regional level. Now, these are treaties at the global level, where some countries have decided to become part of, some countries have chosen to stay away. So there is NPT, Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and countries have been asked to sign this treaty. 191 countries have become party to it, but the problem with this treaty is that the countries of the world are put in two categories. There are nuclear weapons possessing countries, which are allowed to keep their weapons, and any country is not allowed to test or keep a weapon after 1967. So that is the date before which all five members of the Security Council had tested and had made their weapons. The last country to do so was China in 64. And there is a very interesting story that India was offered by the United States to test its own weapon, but the Prime Minister at that time, Jawaharlal Nehru, declined that offer. And his grandson, we will also talk about this as the last point here. Rajiv Gandhi is the only head of the state in the entire world who has presented a plan for complete nuclear disarmament in 1988 to the General Assembly. So he said, okay, we will sign the NPT, but let the five Security Council members tell us in a time-bound manner when they will give up their weapons. Anyway, so that is history because the five Security Council members did not agree to that. So after NPT, there was the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. So the NPT was signed by everybody except for countries which wanted to possess nuclear weapons like India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea entered it and then came out of it when they tested. So CDBT was a treaty where it was sought to ban the nuclear tests, but it did not enter into force because India, Pakistan did not sign it. So the countries which possess nuclear power were supposed to be part of it, but India and Pakistan chose not to be part of it. Therefore, it never entered into force. Then there was a fissile material cut-off treaty. So it was thought that okay, there are these countries, 9 or 10 countries who have nuclear weapons. So if they're not willing to give up their weapons, let us at least have have a cap on the fissile material that they can keep. So fissile material is the material which can be used for making bomb. But it is still a proposal. And the most interesting is the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, entered into force in 2021. This is the only treaty which talks about complete abolition of nuclear weapons, and quite understandably, the countries which keep nuclear weapons, which possess nuclear weapons, are not part of it. So let us now come to South Asia, the topic for the day. Right now, there is no dialogue like what happened between the United States and the Soviet Union and later Russia, or between. So there is also an interesting history of Argentina and Brazil wanting to trying to make nuclear weapon, but before they could make their weapons, they realized the danger of it and entered into an agreement, entered into dialogue, and reached an agreement that they would not make nuclear weapon, and they formed a joint committee of scientists who would oversee that none of the two countries ever embark the path of making nuclear weapon. So nothing is happening between India and Pakistan like that. We haven't held a dialogue about trying to put a cap on our nuclear weapons or try to not make any more weapons. But recently, Narendra Modi, in the context of the U.S. Ukraine, the Russian Ukraine war, has apparently suggested to Vladimir Putin that, and this is very recent, in 22, that this is not an era of war. So it's very interesting. And as you saw, he is also part of the leaders of G20. Uh, uh, sorry, he's also part of the leaders of G20, which has said that threat of using nuclear weapons was inadmissible. So Narendra Modi is part of this. So the question is, if he thinks that this is not an era of war and threat of nuclear weapon is inadmissible, why should India and Pakistan not enter into a dialogue like Narendra Modi wants Russia and Ukraine to do? Now, it is very interesting that China is a bigger nuclear power, but India's business with China has grown in spite of the Chinese incursions, during the prime ministership of Narendra Modi. So it is quite interesting that India has so-called two enemies, Pakistan and China, but its view on China is quite different from that of Pakistan. It doesn't engage with Pakistan in trade. The India-Pakistan trade is only of about $3 billion, whereas there is a possibility of $20 billion trade between India and Pakistan. But India doesn't open up trade with Pakistan like the way it does with China. And China has been very, very aggressive towards India for the last couple of years. But India doesn't know how to deal with this situation. The leaders have not spoken to each other for over 2 years. They recently met at G20, but I think India doesn't know how to go ahead with this with this process and safeguard its territory. The only positive development in recent times has been the opening up of Kartarpur Sahib corridor in 2019. So this is a Sikh religious place inside Pakistan, 5 kilometers inside uh, the India-Pakistan border in Pakistan, and Sikhs would like to visit this. So they have been given the freedom to go there without a passport or a visa. So there's a corridor. That's why it's called a corridor, and that has been a very positive development because there are a lot of people on both sides of border who have their relatives on the other side, who have their religious places on the other side. In fact, I had proposed that India and Pakistan relationship has always been a tit for tat. So if Pakistan is opening up the Kartarpur Sahib corridor, India should open up a corridor for Pakistani citizens to come to the Ajmer Sharif Dargah, because that's a very holy shrine, and a lot of people from Pakistan would like to visit it. But unfortunately, this is one time when India has not responded, in the same manner as Pakistan has done. And Imran Khan, when this border was opened, said that this is a bright future of coming. He said the bright future of coming generation lies in peace. And Narendra Modi said that is the only time I have seen Narendra Modi praising a Pakistani leader, and he compared it to the fall of Berlin Wall. So, if leaders think that this act was so important, why don't they extend it to the level of the two countries and hold a dialogue like the previous governments have done, including a previous Bharatiya Janata Party right-wing government under the prime ministership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. It was only after his dialogue with Nawaz Sharif that a bus service was opened between India and Pakistan, and a lot of other positive things happened. So we have a very interesting situation where people want peace. I have been to Pakistan 10 times, and I have always felt that the common people would like the borders to open up. And I would end with a very interesting experience from my peace march. When I was walking from, so the Indian government allowed us to walk from Delhi to Wagah border, and 9 Pakistani citizens joined us towards the end of the march. For the last 4 days, it was about a month-long march, and then we went to Pakistan. We were not allowed to walk, but we were allowed to go in vehicles from Lahore to Multan, about 500 kilometers. So we were carrying a signature campaign which said 3 things. It said that India and Pakistan must resolve all their disputes through dialogue, and the issue of Kashmir, which is a sore point in the relationship between India and Pakistan, should be resolved according to the wishes of people of Jammu and Kashmir. Number two, two countries must give up their nuclear weapons and should reduce their defense budgets and instead use the valuable resources to eliminate poverty from their respective countries. And third was to do away with the passport visa system and allow people to move freely across the border. Now, when we were walking near the Indian Punjab city of Jalandhar, one person who sings religious songs in the Gurdwara, he came up to me on his bicycle, and he said that the order of your demands is incorrect. And I didn't know what he was talking about. So, and I first of all I tried to understand who he was. So he was a very ordinary person, uh, and I was amazed that he made such a wise suggestion. He said that if you put the number 3 demand as the number 1 demand, which means that the border should be opened up, then your other 2 demands, that is the dispute should be resolved through dialogue, and there should be a reduction in defense budget, it would be easier to get them resolved. And that has been the most amazing experience of my work related to India Pakistan peace and friendship. And I feel that we are the same people. I mean, Pakistan is the only country where I can go and speak my mother tongue and can be understood. Same food, same culture, everything. So if people are allowed to meet, there is a great possibility that the disputes can be resolved. But unfortunately, the politics of two countries doesn't allow that, and especially with the present Indian government, we have not been getting permissions to go across the border and pursue the agenda of peace and friendship. But there is a great possibility. We have always believed in that, and we feel this is a difficult phase that we are going through, where relationships have soured. but I'm sure there will be a revival of relationships, and it is the people who will drive the agenda. Because when ultimately Manmohan Singh and the Pakistani leaders agreed to some things, the language that Manmohan Singh was using, our prime minister, was exactly the same language that peace activists have been talking about. He in fact spoke about a borderless Kashmir. So, as you know, Kashmir is shared by India and Pakistan, and he was talking about removing the border between the two Kashmirs, which are under India and Pakistan, and allow the people of Kashmir to move freely across the border. So he opened up several points on the India-Pakistan border. So a lot of things happened when he was prime minister, and it was very interesting that he was doing exactly the same thing that we have been talking about. So I have a firm belief that the people of India and Pakistan who aspire for peace and friendship uh, will drive the agenda, and ultimately the governments will have to agree to what they want. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey, for that really remarkable lecture. And I think it's refreshing to hear some possible signs of optimism, or talk about the thinking about optimism, given that so many of us, when we talk about these issues, there's not many good news stories. So I appreciate you highlighting the Kartarpur corridor story and some of those other issues as well. So what you said has certainly sparked a number of questions in my mind, and we've gotten a number of questions from the audience. And I'm sure that Kaiser and Aftab may want to ask some as well. So maybe let me just pose to you two questions about the disarmament prospects issue, and then I'll invite the others to pose a question if they'd like. So I think it's helpful when thinking about the potential for disarmament, considering the few countries that have actually denuclearized, and as you would know, correct me if I'm wrong, there are four countries that have denuclearized, and three of them were essentially former Soviet states,
Yeah.
Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and they all basically denuclearized once the Iron Curtain fell down, concluding that it didn't serve their interest to have these, given that the Cold War had ended. South Africa is the other case, very interesting as well. And I think the desire there was also linked to the Cold War. And I know that the South African leadership at the time wanted to have a nuclear-free Africa, and so denuclearizing helped in that context. But when we turn to India and Pakistan, obviously it's a very different context, right? Obviously, these two countries became nuclear well after the Cold War ended. So I guess my question to you on that is, where do we even start to think about how the incentive structure would need to change to compel India and Pakistan to think that they could even consider the possibility of denuclearizing down the road? And the second question linked to that, and there actually were a few queries from the audience about this too, gets to the issue of confidence building measures. Are there some confidence building measures that you could identify that could, A, bring the two countries closer together, and also, B, more broadly, compel the two countries to look to the day when they would seriously consider the idea of denuclearization? And someone asked the question of, if there were to be reductions in conventional stockpiles, could that then be a confidence building measure toward the idea of denuclearizing down the road? So I would welcome your response to those initial questions.
So Michael, the first question is a question related to mindset. And as I mentioned, there are so many countries which have decided not to possess weapons, and you mentioned the four countries, and if we add Argentina and Brazil to it, there are countries which have voluntarily given up their weapons, uh, and then there are countries like India and Pakistan who feel that they need this weapon. The commonly justified argument is related to deterrence, but then you don't know what that deterrence is, because even after India possessing nuclear weapons, Pakistan has invaded India in Kargil, and when the actual war was to be fought, it was to be fought with conventional means. I mean, you could not use a nuclear weapon. In fact, by making the nuclear weapon, I think India has lost the advantage of being more powerful in terms of conventional, army. So we have made this weapon. We can't use it in a war. We have created a very difficult situation. I think only when we come out of this mindset, where we have started believing that somehow this is a deterrence, that we will be able to give it up. Without changing that mindset, I mean, we have to think like the other countries which are part of nuclear weapon free zones, or like the other countries that you mentioned. And for that, I think we need saner leaders. We need more wise leaders. Uh, you know, I was very happy when Imran Khan became the prime minister, because the first thing he said is that I am the best man to promote peace and friendship with India, because I have so many friends and fans in India. But at that time, the Indian government was not ready to take up the offer. So I guess we have to wait for an opportune time for more wise leaders who will realize that this is a futile weapon and we have to give it up. Uh, the I forget the second question that you asked.
CBMs, possible
Yeah,
confidence.
yeah, yeah. Oh, there are many. There are many. I mean, as I mentioned, opening up the borders is one, which Pakistan has done recently. Although it is limited only to Sikh religion followers. But even if you don't completely open up the border, if you open up the trade, that itself will be a big confidence building measure. Right now, India and Pakistan do trade, but most of it is through circuitous routes. So we send material to some third country and then it goes to Pakistan and vice versa. So if there is direct trade between India and Pakistan, like between India and China, the feeling of animosity will reduce, if not end completely, between the governments, like it is between India and China. I found it very surprising that even after China has invaded Indian territory, when Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping met in Bali, it was, I mean, they were quite cordial. They were quite cordial. So and as I mentioned, the business has grown many times since the Chinese invasion. So I think trade is one thing which should be opened up, and they should allow people to travel across the border even as tourists, because that is one thing you can't do between India and Pakistan. You can't just go like a tourist. You have to have an invitation, and now it has become very difficult because the governments will not approve your visits. So if I have to go to Pakistan, not only do I need a visa from the Pakistani High Commission on my passport, I also need a permission from my home ministry, and vice versa. This is a very strange kind of arrangement, and they give us city specific visas. So promoting trade and tourism, I think, can be the biggest confidence building measure that the two governments can pursue.
Sandeep ji, I have a question.
Yeah.
The Hindus and Muslims have been living in harmony for centuries in the area.
Yeah.
But now we can see all kinds of conflicts. Historically, Biradari and ethnicity was more important than religion. So, how did we come to this point when every religion has a conflict within itself and then with other religions? Could you talk about it?
So, recently there was an event to commemorate Bahadur Shah Zafar, the who was also described as the last Mughal. So, in 1857 War of Independence, uh, I was struck by the fact that there was the Indian Indians who were serving in the British Army. they were revolting against the government. But when these soldiers marched from Meerut to Delhi, and I'm sure there were more Hindus in that and more upper caste Hindus, they requested Bahadur Shah Zafar to lead their movement. Similarly, if you see, there was Khan Bahadur Khan in Bareilly, there was Begum Hajrat Mahal in Lucknow, there were of course Rani Jhansi ki Rani in Jhansi, and Nana Sahib in Kanpur, and Kunwar Singh on the border of Bihar. So the soldiers were revolting against the British, but it did not matter to them who was their leader, Hindu or Muslim. So until 1857, I think there is, it's a proven fact that Hindus and Muslims were living together and in harmony in this country. I think things have started changing only after that, and everybody knows how the right wing Hindu and the right wing Muslim politics, created divisions between the two communities, and 100 years later, or 90 years later, there was we had reached a point where the two, at least the two right wing groups, could not live together, and both Savarkar of the Hindu Mahasabha and Mr. Jinnah of the Muslim League, they became adherents to the two nation theory. But I would say, Kaisar Sahab, that the ordinary Hindus and Muslims, even after the rise of right wing politics in India, and this I saw very closely during the COVID times when I was working for relief in and around Lucknow, and we were running about 13 kitchens. So there was never a dispute, on religious lines. If ever there was any controversy, it was related to caste. The upper caste people would not like the lower caste people to touch their utensils. Things like that. So I see that at the level of common people, or when I go to Pakistan, I have never felt that I have come to another country. Not to talk about enemy country. I don't feel that I am in an alien country. It seems like my own country. So I think, and the people are so warm, and so that is very interesting. That India and Pakistan are considered to be enemies. There might be people who will talk things against Pakistan, but if you actually put them face to face with a Pakistani, they will be very cordial and will be very warm. So that we have seen, in so many visits of people from Pakistan visiting India and India visiting Pakistan. So, and that is the only hope, that we can be friends and there can be peace. So I would not, I think whatever division is there is only political, first of all, and secondly, it is very superficial. I think as the atmosphere will change because of a different leadership, this animosity will go away. And as I mentioned, when we have wise leaders, I think by the stroke of one decision, leaders can change the relationships. For example, if you decided to open up the borders, if the leaders agree to open up the borders, immediately overnight, I think the atmosphere will change.
Thank you.
Yeah, like the fall of Berlin Wall.
Yeah.
Dr. Pandey, I've got two questions for you. One is about the role of peace organizations like IPPNW, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. The South Asian region chapter, I have been in contact with them, and over the years they have been meeting. I would really like to know your point of view about some groups like that. How significant is their role? And the question number two is, in United States, the manufacturing of weapons and arms race is fueled by the lobbying of the military-industrial complex. I know in Pakistan, all the weapon manufacturing is in the public sector. Would you comment whether there is a lobby for military-industrial complex in India?
Okay. So the answer to the first question is that there are many organizations. One organization which exists by the same name in two countries is called Pakistan India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy, PIPFPD, and Asma Jahangir ji was quite active with this organization. And until the Modi government came to power, we used to have the biannual meetings once in 2 years, but those were also not very regular. Sometimes there were problems in getting visas for delegates from the other country. But we did used to have those meetings, once in Pakistan and the other time in India. So I have attended several of those meetings, once in Karachi, once in Allahabad, and hundreds of delegates. I mean, 200-300 delegates would come, and that was a wonderful occasion. When people from two countries would share all their thoughts and culture and everything. Uh, and then there are smaller organizations or specific organizations like the one you mentioned, International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. The Indian chapter is called IDPD, Indian Doctors for Peace and Development. I don't know by what name it exists in Pakistan, but the Indian chapter is headed by Dr. Arun Mitra in Ludhiana. And when we were walking from Delhi to Wagah in 2005, he kind of welcomed us in Ludhiana, and he walked with us while we were walking in the Ludhiana district. So they also play a very important role. In fact, what I did not present in my presentation today were the effects due to radiation on the sites of nuclear uranium mining and nuclear power plants. So all that work has been done by IDPD and also Surendra Gadekar and Sangmitra Gadekar, which shows that this weapon can be dangerous to yourself. I mean, you make it for the enemy, but you never use it. But actually, you are causing damage to yourself by carrying out this activity, because the radiation causes harm to people. So anyway, these organizations have been playing their role. They are very small in terms of membership, but as I mentioned, the agenda that we talk about, the discussions that we have in our meetings are essentially the same things. When the leaders meet, they talk about. So in a way, we are kind of setting the agenda, at least in this area. We talk about a lot of things. For example, I have a completely different view of the economic policy that our country should adopt, but my government will not listen to that. But when it comes to peace and friendship between India and Pakistan, my government will do exactly what I am saying, when, if and when they choose to decide to have peace and friendship.
Thank you. Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
And the other question was whether there was a military-industrial complex.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, definitely there is a lobby which promotes which comes in the way of peace and friendship between India and Pakistan. It would like both countries, number one, uh, to make and possess weapons, dangerous weapons, and number two, it would like the countries to kind of let the right wing politics survive. So there are groups within both countries which believe in right wing politics, and until they are there, the chances of peace and friendship are remote. The people believing in peace and friendship have to start dominating, before we can change the equation. And the arms lobby is, and now in India at least, there is we have international agreements. We have agreements with not only the United States but France, Israel, and we have joint military exercises. We buy weapons from these countries, and it is very interesting that sometimes India will object to United States to selling the same weapon to Pakistan. So very interesting dynamics. But it is for India and Pakistan to realize that they should not be buying the weapons made by these Western countries if they have to make peace and friendship. I mean, you are making the weapons bought from the same country against each other. Very, you know, peculiar situation. So it requires the wisdom, of leaders to realize that they should not buy into this whole game of armament and promote the arms industry.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just a reminder for our audience members tuning in, if you have a question for Dr. Pandey, you should see right below the screen where he's speaking an event chat box, and you could type in your name and your question there. It'll come to me and we'll get to the questions. So just wanted to ask you another two questions, and actually really one question. It's linked to separate ones. I'm going to identify two factors. I'd like to hear how you think these could impact prospects for peace and greater cooperation in the region. One is what I would describe as the changing or the evolving nature of threats, particularly keeping in mind that we're seeing increasingly global threats that impact everyone equally, or not equally, but impact many countries in the same way, particularly in South Asia. So climate change, for example, we know that that's an increasing threat for both India and Pakistan and the broader region. So I guess my question there is, do you think that is something that could help bring the region together? I mean, we saw at the climate conference, the COP27 conference last week, and it's going on this week too, that all the South Asian countries were taking the same position on the need for the loss and damage policy to be adapted. All the SAARC countries, and we know that India and Pakistan don't agree on much, they were operating in lockstep on that. So as this climate change threat gets worse, is that something that could compel, generate an incentive for the two countries to figure out ways to work together? And the related threat on that level is pandemics. I mean, we saw with COVID, we did see an attempt by SAARC to try to bring together the region to talk about joint responses. It didn't work out very well because of India-Pakistan problems. So that's the first question. Second
Yes.
is the issue of demographics. I mean, as you well know, South Asia is a very young region demographically. The median age, I think, is 22 or 23 in both India and Pakistan. And so my question is, it's sort of a cliched question. We hear it a lot. In your own advocacy, in your own work, do you sense that these younger generations of Indians and Pakistanis are more inclined to think about the possibility of peace than their parents and older generations? My own experiences have been that it's very complex. That certainly you do have some constituencies within the younger generations that are more open-minded and want to look for a better relationship with the other. But then you also have some younger folks that are even more hard-line than their parents' generation about not wanting to move closer to the other, and that could have something to do with the proliferation of these private media channels in India that have been very what I would describe as hard line when it comes to reconciliation and so on. Anyway, so if you could address the issue of demographics and the issue of how threats are changing, and if that could be provide a positive for bringing the two countries together.
Yeah. Yes, Michael, I think the point about climate change is very relevant. And there have been adverse climate events in all countries of South Asia, not related to Pakistan, but if we consider Bangladesh, for example, which was earlier part of Pakistan. So it is believed that a large part of Bangladesh is going to go underwater because of climate change. And India is going to have a big refugee problem. So it is in the interest of India that it helps Bangladesh deal with this problem. Otherwise, it will have to deal with a large number of refugees. So I'm sure because we have shared borders, we have shared geography. It is in the interest of both countries, to deal with this problem of climate change in a collective manner. And I think as the problem becomes severe, the countries will realize that they have to work together. Yes, pandemic is also a good example, which required the countries to work together. But unfortunately, the kind of government we have in India at this time refused any help from Pakistan. I remember the ED Foundation, which runs an ambulance service in Pakistan, had offered a fleet of ambulances to be sent to India along with all the staff, the drivers and the mechanics and everybody. But the Indian government refused. I think that was such a good opportunity, to extend a hand of friendship. But the Indian government, lost that opportunity. Uh, but I agree with you that such adverse situations will, if not today, tomorrow, will force the countries to work together. About the youth, I think I agree with you that there is a section of youth who has been influenced by the right wing politics, and therefore they are more hardline in their approach towards Pakistan. It is very interesting that they do not have any experience about Pakistan, and yet they have formed an opinion about Pakistan. For example, I myself, even though have grown up in the city of Lucknow, used to believe until I met the first Pakistani student on my first day in United States, that Urdu and Hindi were different languages. When I met this Pakistani student at Syracuse, uh, and when he, after a while, he started speaking in Urdu, I asked him, "How do you know Hindi?" He said, "I am not speaking Hindi, I am speaking Urdu." But it was the same language which I speak. So it is then that I realized that Hindi and Urdu are the same language. So a lot of youth, it is very unfortunate, without realizing the realities, they have formed their opinion about Pakistan, which makes it difficult to convince them. But on the other hand, there are youth, who would like to promote peace and friendship between India and Pakistan. There are various, fora, more online now, because of first the pandemic, and also the nature of the government, which doesn't allow exchange visits. Uh, but I mean, if it has to happen, it will have to happen through the youth. I think the youth will lead the process of friendship and peace between the two countries. Youth are the future. We have a lot of sensible youth, today, who are participating in various kinds of movements. Notable among these is the Fridays for Future, which is being led completely by school-going students. So I am sure there will be youth who will work on this issue also, and we will have some forward movement in this direction.
Okay. Dr. Pandey, we have seen a wave of populism around the world. You have seen in the United States. It's also very prominent in Pakistan. And I think we have been talking about youth. And there is a youth for this community. There is nothing logical. They just follow the leader, whatever he says. So, do you think populism is a kind of hurdle in peace in South Asia and in other countries?
Uh, yeah, I mean, to some extent it is, because, as I mentioned, there are right wing groups in both countries who are promoting an agenda which makes it very difficult for two countries to live peacefully with each other, and these groups do influence the youth.
Mhm.
So so long as these groups continue to be active, our task will be difficult. But my only belief is that hate or animosity or any negative feelings are not permanent. They eventually will decrease and will die down. The what is permanent is positive feelings, feelings of friendship and love and brotherhood. And I think that is what is going to ultimately survive. And when people will realize their mistakes, they will come back to the right path.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to ask a question to Dr. Penny before I go to the audience? Aftab or Karno? Okay. Oh, yes, Aftab, please.
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Oh, you're fine. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, we've gotten some interesting questions, and one of them, this is sort of you've been talking about prospects for denuclearization. There's a question about the opposite extreme, I guess, and that is essentially what do you think are the prospects for an actual nuclear exchange? And I think the question related to the world on the whole. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your take on South Asia. The question was, do you think regional conflict among nuclear states could cause the unthinkable nuclear disaster? Now, we've seen in recent months alone in the India-Pakistan context, you had a missile that ended up in Pakistan, an accidental missile, or accidentally fired into Pakistan, according to India. There was not escalation because cooler heads prevailed, but that's the type of thing that, in a different context, could really lead to a very significant and concerning level of escalation. So, do you think that there is a possibility that this world could see a nuclear exchange? You had mentioned earlier that, not since 1945 that has anyone used nuclear weapons, and only the US has used a nuclear weapon. But do you foresee any type of worst case scenario? And if so, what type of thing could precipitate it?
So, Michael, the world has seen number of you know accidents or close shave. There has been the Cuban Missile Crisis and other instances when it appeared as if the nuclear war could break out. But fortunately, most of the times it was just a matter of luck. But at other times, I think it was wiser leadership, which did not allow the situation to go out of control. So yes, accidents do occur, like the missile incident that you were talking about. India had also carried out a surgical strike inside Pakistan. That could have been a provocation. Or before that, Pakistan had entered Kargil. That could have been a provocation, because all these incidents are after India and Pakistan have possessed nuclear weapons. But fortunately, the leadership on one side or both sides, decided not to escalate the situation. There have been accidents in almost, every Indian nuclear power plant, but we haven't had a bad one like in Chernobyl or in Fukushima. So we cannot, predict about how the accident can go out of control. But I think the leaders everywhere are wise enough, and we hope that there is some kind of only one person is not taking a decision. There is some kind of a command system, command and control system, where more than one people are part of it, and hopefully sane advice will prevail, and nuclear weapon will not be used. That has saved the world so far, and I think that will continue to happen. And that is why we say that we should completely get rid of this dangerous thing. Otherwise, even an accident can be very fatal. So that is my view.
Well, thank you. And there's a question about what role, if any, do you think the international community should play in trying to um, urge the two countries to reduce their nuclear weapon supplies, if not denuclearize? Do you think there's anything the international community can or should do?
Yeah, I think the international community definitely has a role. Uh, but as I mentioned, until the five major powers, the members of the Security Council, decide to disarm themselves, until they give a timeline that they would give up their weapons, the other countries which possess the weapons will probably not agree to it. So I think it is very important, the kind of thing that Rajiv Gandhi was talking about in the General Assembly, that there should be an agreement. I was reading about the treaties between the USSR and US. I mean, if you read about it looks insane. They are talking about reducing their weapons, uh, and then there are various questions that the weapons on land can be monitored, but how do you monitor the weapons in submarines and on airplanes? So it's a very complex situation. I mean, uh, first you decide that you will reduce your arms, and then you have to come up with very complex system of verifying that the countries are actually disarming or reducing their weapons. This is insane. I think you have to take a decision to get rid of them completely and be honest about it. That is the only way we will be safe. I mean, I'm not disparaging the talks which happen, because that is the way of moving forward. So it is good that countries do engage in talks, and they try to reduce their levels of armament. But I think ultimately we have to talk about zero nuclear weapons. I mean, if we are so enamored about this philosophy of globalization, if we think that capital should move globally and technology should move globally, and the multinational corporations should have access to the world market, uh, what is the need of keeping armies on borders? Like Europe, we should completely do away with armies, and become a truly globalized world. Everybody should be free to move, you know anywhere in the world.
Very interesting thought there. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so, a question about society. There was a discussion earlier about populism and its impact on the situation, but there's a question from an audience member. What can be done to restrain religious fanatics on both sides, India and Pakistan, from fanning hatred toward the other? It's obviously a delicate, sensitive issue, but what is your view on that?
No, as I mentioned earlier also, I think the only way we can do it is when the saner voice will prevail. And for that, a majority of the people have to believe in the concepts of communal harmony and friendship and brotherhood. Our constitution, the Indian constitution, guarantees justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. So those are the core values on which our constitution has been formed. Unfortunately, even the past governments have started moving away from the constitution, and have created an environment where the right wing has found a space to assert itself. Uh, but I think people are realizing it, and recently the Supreme Court of India has made it very clear that hate speeches will not be allowed, and it has asked the authorities to take cognizance of anybody indulging in hate speech and to take action. So, of course, the law and order machinery has to work, the courts have to work, and not be influenced by the populism. But I think the greater responsibility is of the society. The society, has to take the ultimate responsibility for preserving the values of harmony and brotherhood. So at this point, I must mention that even though we face this problem of religious fanaticism, and there have been number of incidents of communal riots or religious feelings behind violence, but let me also tell you that there have been equal number of examples of people trying to save people from the other community. People are trying to protect the victims. A good example would be journalist from Kerala, Siddiq Kappan, is in jail in Uttar Pradesh. And when he got bail from the court, it was a former vice chancellor of Lucknow University, Professor Roop Rekha Verma, who agreed to accept the bail for this person. So there have been examples like this in our society where people going across religious lines have stood by each other, and that is, I think, that keeps us going. That keeps us going, and there are more people who believe in that concept. It is very unfortunate that because of the dominant politics, a lot of the people have become silent or don't assert themselves. But the ruling party gets about 40% of votes, which means 60% of the country is still doesn't believe in the ideology of religious fanaticism.
I think that's a really important point to make. I think the flip side of the stories we hear about religious extremism, the fact that there is more intercommunal harmony than we may otherwise expect or think. But no, that's a critical point. A question, getting back to geopolitics, a question about China. China is increasingly being seen as a strategic and economic threat to India, especially due to its close relationship with Pakistan and with its border incursions at the line of actual control. Given that China is a nuclear power, how does this factor into India's incentive to denuclearize?
Yeah. So I don't think India's nuclear capabilities are any match to that of China. I think when India tested its weapon, it was for Pakistan. So India has made its weapon for Pakistan, and Pakistan has made its weapon for India. I don't think India hopes to win any nuclear war or even a conventional war with China today. The Chinese are too strong. But on the other hand, I have always believed that China, and it was a surprise to me when China, invaded India in Galwan. Unlike the India-Pakistan border, there has been no killing on the India-China border. In fact, in 2018, I was taking out a peace march from Ahmedabad to the Gujarat border of Pakistan. And one of our demands was that the soldiers between India and Pakistan should not fire at each other. I mean, if the Indian security agencies have to act against the terrorists, that of course they have to do. But the soldiers should not fire on each other, because there was an unspoken understanding between India and China that the soldiers will not fire at each other or will not kill each other. They would throw stones at each other, they would wrestle with each other, they would push each other, into their boundaries, but will not fire. So it was a surprise that in Galwan, 20 Indian soldiers were killed after a long time. but before I go on with that story, let me just mention a very interesting point about the Peace March in 2018 from Ahmedabad to Nadabit. Narendra Modi's wife came to support us. And, she said that just as I pray to God that Mr. Modi should win the election from Varanasi when he contests the parliamentary election, I pray to God that India and Pakistan should become friends and peace should prevail. Very simple lady. She's a retired government school teacher. Doesn't live with Modi, although they are not divorced. She still considers him as her husband, and she promotes the idea of peace and friendship. It's like any common Indian would do, But coming back to the India-China question, so our relationship has been very interesting. It's a love-hate kind of relationship. India has given refuge to Dalai Lama and about 1 lakh Tibetans. China doesn't like it. Tibetans are fighting for their freedom. That is a sad story. They do not get the kind of support and recognition which the Palestinians or other people fighting for their independence get. The about 150 Tibetans have self-immolated themselves, to draw attraction to their plight. Chinese have just crushed them, but we are not able to do anything for them. But India and China have maintained, a good relationship until the Chinese invasion during Modi's regime. But I have always believed that China will never attack India because the size of the Indian market is too large. And I think economics is what dominates global politics more than the idea of capturing territories or the idea of colonialism. So this is the only hope, that because the size of the Indian middle class is equal to the entire US population, the China would be interested in that market and would not disturb that. So even though it has plans to acquire territories which fall within the Indian boundary, like the Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, Sikkim, it also has plans to take over Nepal. So five fingers, Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, and I miss one other territory. But I don't think it will go beyond a point because of the reason I mentioned, and hopefully there will be no further escalation of what has happened.
Thank you. And indeed, I mean, you make an important point that, despite this rivalry, India and China have continued to cooperate commercially on pretty
Yes.
significant levels throughout, even after the 2020 clash. I know that there have been some immediate moves to ban certain Chinese apps in India and to cut off certain things. But indeed, according to the figures, I think over the last fiscal year in India, India's trade with China was still quite robust. It was one of its top bilateral trade partners. And of course, this is something that we have not seen with India and Pakistan. And many economists from both countries have talked about all the possible opportunities for better trade or for more trade between the two. As you know, those two countries within South Asia on the whole don't really trade much with each other. They trade more with countries far away, which is certainly a loss economically, but obviously the political tensions prevent better things from happening. So another question, and Kaiser and Aftab, if either of you have another question, feel free to add in. But one more question from the audience, and it's also geopolitical in nature, and it's actually very simple. How do you think the war in Ukraine impacts security in South Asia? It's an interesting question. South Asia, of course, does not have a hostile relationship with Russia at all. But did you want to comment on how this conflict in Ukraine has impacted or could impact security or stability in South Asia?
No, it has worsened the security atmosphere because of the threat by Russia to use nuclear weapons, and it has procrastinated quite a lot. I mean, we never thought it would go on for so long. So in addition to the economy, the global economy that it is affecting, um, prices of commodities have gone up. We are feeling that pinch. Uh, I think the more dangerous thing is this talk of use of nuclear weapons, because as I mentioned, countries normally uh, uh, you know desist from using these weapons and do not like to talk about it. But recently, not just the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but also China-Taiwan conflict, there have been, threats issued by the nuclear weapon possessing countries, and that is not good for the subcontinent, because um, India and Pakistan have weapons, and whatever thought we could have of disarming ourselves will go away if we think that a nuclear weapon is something which can save you. So uh, so that is a very negative development, uh, that there is a talk of using the weapons. So very rightly, the leaders in G20 have said that threat of using nuclear weapon is inadmissible. But then if they say that, they should believe in it, and they should actually coerce Russia and China also, to agree to a plan, a time-bound plan to give up their weapons. It is so sad that Ukraine is one of the countries, as you mentioned, which gave up its nuclear weapons after after USSR was dismantled, and it was with the belief that it will never require any nuclear weapon for its security. Uh, and the country which it trusted, Russia, to keep its nuclear weapons, is the aggressor now. And had Ukraine kept its nuclear weapons, probably Russia would not have uh, been able to attack Ukraine in this manner. So that is very unfortunate. That what Russia is doing will in fact, I was just reading that the chairperson of International Atomic Energy Agency has said that because of the war, the demand for nuclear power has gone up. Because along with nuclear weapons, I'm also part of the campaign which opposes nuclear energy, and that is the other part of presentation which I did not do today, of how the radiation affects human lives. So we believe that nuclear energy is not a source of safe power. That is also dangerous. Uh, I mean, not in just in terms of radiation, but also if you possess nuclear energy, you can also make nuclear weapons. So because it is the same technology. So because of the war and the crisis of climate change now, and the energy crisis which has resulted because of this war, a lot of countries are thinking of the nuclear energy option, which is another negative development which has taken place because of this war. So we only hope that Russia will not drive us more insane and force the world to adopt the option of nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. We were moving in a direction in which countries were at least giving up the nuclear energy option, if not the nuclear weapons option. I mean, the entire Europe and Japan and United States, uh, have no plans of expanding nuclear energy. They are not putting up new nuclear power plants. But this war will probably change that, and it is very unfortunate.
Dr. Pandey.
Pandey, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about the organization South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SARC.
Yeah.
What do you think about SARC and whether it will play an important role in bringing peace and better economic situation in the region?
Yeah, Aftab Saab, SARC was a very important forum. Like the United Nations globally, it was a forum locally in South Asia where countries could have resolved their disputes. But unfortunately, the animosity between India and Pakistan is not allowing SARC to move forward. In fact, it is almost frozen. And instead, Narendra Modi has formed new forum. A forum in which Myanmar is now part of. I think it's called BIMSTEC, where Bangladesh, Myanmar are all part of it. So quite obviously, he doesn't want to deal with Pakistan. I mean, when our cricket control board, the vice president or the secretary, Amit Shah's son, has issued a statement that India will not play in Pakistan. We are at such an ebb of our relationship. How can we expect any political dialogue to take place when we are not willing to play cricket in Pakistan? This is very sad. And SAR could have played very important role, but it is the unwise leadership, especially of India at this time, I would say, which is preventing things from moving forward.
Very sad. Thank you.
Dr. Pandey, besides this situation of conflicts between India and Pakistan, there have been many efforts to come to senses and find a middle ground and talk about peace. But I think the biggest issue is Kashmir. Uh, before we actually talk about peace in the South Asian region. The last time we heard about both countries came together was during Musharraf's regime, and they talk about four-point agenda, four-point solution, which includes basically opening up the borders so people can visit each other, their relatives, the trade will be open, and then give regional autonomy, electoral and democratic autonomy to each regions in the Kashmir. What do you think about resolving the Kashmir issues? And do you think, is there any back channel going on to have a kind of negotiations and talk between the two countries?
Yeah. See, I don't think any back channel is operating now because this government is adamant. It doesn't think that Pakistan is a party to any solution to Kashmir. When Amit Shah goes there, he says, "Why should I talk to Pakistan? I will talk to the youth of Kashmir." But what the Indian government has done in Kashmir is definitely not, taking us to any solution. In fact, it has made the situation worse. At least in earlier days, we had some kind of government, even though for namesake, but there was an elected government by some small percentage of the population of Jammu and Kashmir, which used to take decisions about Jammu and Kashmir. Even though at times the army would not allow them a free hand. For example, I remember when Omar Abdullah was the chief minister, he wanted the Indian government to remove Armed Forces Special Powers Act from Jammu and Kashmir, but the Indian army didn't agree to it. But at least they had their own government. But under the present regime, there is no government in Kashmir, since they diluted the Article 370 and 35A. It is an outsider, a lieutenant governor. He was a senior to me when I was studying engineering at Banaras Hindu University. This lieutenant governor is now in charge, and he's taking decisions on behalf of the BJP government in power in Delhi. So I totally agree with you. I think the last time we came close to a solution on Kashmir was during Manmohan Singh's time, and he had clearly said that he would make Kashmir borderless. And there was some talk of allowing complete freedom to Kashmiris to travel between the two parts, one under the Indian control, the other under the Pakistani control, and some kind of joint arrangement between India and Pakistan, which would allow more autonomy to Kashmir. I think that is the only solution. That is the only solution in the interest of all three parties, the people of Jammu Kashmir, the countries of India and Pakistan. But I guess again we have to wait for more saner leadership, before we can reach that kind of solution.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I must say the time has flown by. We're going to have to wrap up now. But I think that hearing your comments, Dr. Pandey, what for me, my big takeaway is that it really does come down to leadership. If we want to talk about moving the needle forward on these very ambitious but honorable goals, disarmament, peace, we're going to have to wait until there's a very different type of leadership in the region to be able to move toward that point. I think it's something we can all agree with. But thank you very much for taking time. I know it's late in India, so really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Again, this is a lecture an annual lecture in honor of Asma Jahangir, and we appreciate that you hit on many of the issues that were important to her, and these included regional peace issues, disarmament issues, conflict resolution, social justice, and so many other things that you hit on. So we really appreciate that. I want to thank again our partner in this initiative, the South Asia Democracy Watch, Kaiser Abbas and Aftab Siddiqui. Really enjoy your partnership. We appreciate it. And we look forward to next year's lecture. And finally, I want to thank the audience for tuning in. We got some great questions. Keep them coming. And we hope to be back with you soon. But again, thank you all. And especially you, Dr. Pandey. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care. We are now adjourned.